Before I go into that, just 2 minutes on my background. I kind of alluded to this a little bit. So I've been doing software development for best part of 25 years. I was very early into software development lifecycle before Agile was a thing, before DevOps and CI/CD were a thing. So I followed all of those and been fairly early adopters for all of those. About 8-9 years ago, I got into the infrastructure as code movement before things like Terraform and Ansible and Chef and CloudFormation existed, and followed the developments of all of those technologies as they came along. When I came to the data world as a customer, say about 3 years ago, I was expecting that a company as forward-looking as Datalytics was going to come and talk to me about all of these same things in the same context that I'm used to dealing with. And I expect they would be talking to me about Agile and feature branches and automated regression testing and configuration control and a whole bunch of other things. And despite being one of the most forward-looking organizations in the industry, they weren't. And then when I asked around, the answer is no one was. So in fact, it was actually one of the reasons I joined Datalytics in the early days. And I saw this as a fantastic opportunity to take 20-25 years of experience of how other parts of the industry are doing this and bring it to the data world. And so over the first few months, I worked with the team here, and we realized that we could put the things that we're trying to achieve into 5 buckets. The first one is governance and change control. We've talked a little bit about how the likes of Netflix and eBay and all of the big companies do this. This is an incredibly well-solved problem. And yet I go to billion-dollar customers today and say, so tell me about your change control process for your data warehouse. And they look a little bit sheepish. And they say, well, the answer is Fred sends an email and then he runs some SQL on production. And that's it. And I said, really? Is that how you do your e-commerce application? Is that how you roll out new mobile app software? Is that how you roll out new IT software? No. We have a very rigorous testing and tiered environment model and change control over that. But for some reason, data just seems to be left out. The second one is maintainability. There is a huge focus in the data world on achieving a function. I want a new view on my data that shows A and B and C. And when I have a view on my data that shows A and B and C, we tend to move on. If you've ever been involved in software development, certainly in the last 10 years, someone that has to write a function that adds 2 numbers together cannot submit a function that just adds 2 numbers together. That is the functional requirement. There are a standard set of non-functional requirements that all code must meet. And all of that is about maintainability. Just shipping something that physically works today is not enough. And actually, there's lots of metrics around here for software, less around data because there just hasn't been a thing. But there's a lot of metrics around what is the total cost of ownership of a line of software over a 5-year life. And it typically turns out that the total cost of ownership is something like 5 times the initial development cost. So if it costs you an hour to build it, and you put a dollar value to that, that individual line of code will cost you 5 hours over its life. So a big goal of people writing software is to minimize that and say, well, how about I spend 90 minutes creating it, but reduce its total cost of ownership over its life to 2 hours? So I do a little bit more work up front to make it something that is dramatically easier to maintain going forward. And that's a big focus in the software world, has been for a long time, same as infrastructure as code, but it seems to be something that's very often missing from data projects. The third piece is testability. Testing is not just something that you can wave your arms and make happen. Testing, particularly in data, has to be designed for. You have to design your systems in a way that allows them to be testable. The fourth one is availability. And by availability, I don't mean uptime. I don't mean how many minutes is my web server up or how many minutes is Snowflake available to answer queries. I mean availability in the sense of what percentage of the time is the data that the business is seeing actually good, valid, and correct. Because as a metric, yes, my users 99.99% of the time can run queries. It's fine, and that's important. But if 5% of that time the queries they're running are against data which is invalid, too old, or in some other way not relevant, actually, my availability is pretty poor. And there's a good case to say, actually, no data is better than bad data. If you've got no data and a business user looks at it, they might huff and puff and they might complain, they might raise a trouble ticket, that's fine. But I'd rather they complain about the lack of data and come back the next day and try and answer that question again than make a decision based on bad data, which could end up costing the company millions. So availability in terms of actual valid data to the business is critically important. And then the final piece, where a lot of the rubber hits the road, is speed of development, which we've already talked about. We're expecting data projects to iterate through the left-hand circle in time frames measured in minutes and hours, not as they often are with data projects, timescales measured in weeks and months. So I think the kind of data world is here. I think there are some early adopters, and we count ourselves among those who are really thinking about this and are solving this problem. But it's a very long way away from institutional. In the software and infrastructure as code world, these aren't even discussions. People don't talk about this. It's just the way the world works and has been for a very long time. In the data world, these sort of discussions are pretty cutting edge. But in 5 years' time, we'll look back and we'll talk about software and infrastructure code and data in the same breath. It's just all of this problem has been solved. It's completely baked in. Everybody's doing it. It's just the status quo. And we'll be looking at another area, part of the world, or people will be looking at another area where this doesn't yet apply.